Since the late 19th century, Arab Americans have been an integral part of United States history. Immigrating from regions in Southwest Asia and North Africa, they arrived here, searching for economic opportunities, seeking refuge, or to build a new home, each person with a story of their own. These stories live on through photos, documents, and heirlooms that together tell a larger story of the lived experiences brought to light by the first and only Arab American National Museum.
These artifacts, these objects, they're the stuff of history. Each object can tell us something about the lives of the earliest Arab immigrants or even the most recent ones. By collecting and preserving these objects, we're able to understand and record and document the stories that make up the Arab American community's history and allows us to understand their impact and share them with present and future generations.
The Arab American National Museum is our necessary and compelling storyteller, representing our diverse and rich culture through literature, research, art, and music. Our mission to document, preserve, and present the history and contribution of Arab immigrants and their descendants began in 2005 in Dearborn, the heart of Arab America.
It serves as such an anchor in our community, not just here in Dearborn, but it has such an international reputation. And their collections and what they do to keep the stories alive, to preserve the stories, to preserve that culture is so critical to our society in general.
The museum has drawn tens of thousands of visitors each year from all 50 states and different countries around the world to explore our core galleries and engage with the local community. From Dearborn to Ellis Island and reaching as far as Los Angeles and Houston, the Arab American story has been shared in cities across the nation. Our temporary and traveling exhibitions shine a light on how immigration has shaped the lives of Arab Americans today and how Arab Americans have in turn shaped this country.
The museum gives me a home for my ancestors, a place I can return to again and again to visit and celebrate where and who I come from.
A proud Smithsonian affiliate and accredited by the American Alliance of Museums, the Arab American National Museum educates, engages, and inspires our community to continue expanding the Arab American narrative.
Together, the Arab American National Museum and the Smithsonian are able to tell a more complete American story. Telling this American story through an Arab American lens is so important because it reminds us all what it means to be human and what it means to be a citizen of the United States.
Through youth programs and family-friendly activities, we build a new generation of museum goers, bringing students into our space to learn about their culture and the culture of their peers.
To learn to be the artist I want to be.
To learn that art can be whatever I want it to be.
To learn from and teach each other about our story.
To teach people about beauty and diversity.
The museum has always stood as a national hub for hosting community dialogue, producing and sharing knowledge, and curating thoughtful programming. Today, we continue to foster a community of arts and culture, and we provide a space for us to fully and creatively express ourselves.
Where we can represent ourselves.
To tell my story.
To raise my voice.
At its core, the museum is home to every Arab American across the nation, welcoming people near and far into our doors to experience our unique and incredible story. It is a museum that tells many stories created by us and for us, and carries our legacy forward for generations to come.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 15th Annual Arab American Book Awards ceremony. My name is Sabah Hachimi, and I am the librarian at the Russell J. Abed Library and Resource Center at the Arab American National Museum. Thank you all for joining us on this beautiful Saturday evening. I hope everyone's doing well and staying healthy. We are so happy to be holding yet another Book Awards ceremony. Before we begin, I'd like to ground us, even though we are not physically in the same space. The Arab American National Museum sits on Anishinaabe land and resides within the region with the highest concentration of Arab Americans. We also acknowledge our neighboring city, Detroit, as Anishinaabe territory and other Indigenous peoples' land, as being the largest majority Black city in the nation with a long legacy of African diasporic contributions. Together, we also uplift and honor the Indigenous and diasporic communities from wherever you may be tuning in today. We had prepared for the Book Awards ceremony to be in person this year, but due to the Delta variant and our concerns for the health of our staff, awardees, judges, and guests, we decided a virtual ceremony would be best. Inshallah, next year we can come together again in one room and celebrate Arab American literature and culture in person. The Arab American Book Award program is unique in that it is the only book award program dedicated specifically to Arab American literature. This book award program was established in 2006 in partnership with librarians from the University of Toledo. Its mission is to celebrate Arab American literature and honor those who have produced exemplary work. Also, its mission is to encourage Arab American writers to continue to produce work in order to add Arab American voices and experiences to the American literary landscape. This year, we had 47 awesome submissions from 4 different categories. These categories include adult nonfiction, adult fiction, poetry, and children's literature. Today, we are honoring 9 different titles, 7 of whom are winners and 2 honorable mentions. I would like to give a special thanks to the 15 judges this year. Without all your hard work and dedication, the Book Awards would truly not have been possible this year. Volunteering your time and expertise just for the love of literature, Arab American culture, and your dedication to the Book Awards mission is truly honorable, and the museum thanks you so, so much. To the Book Award winners, we are very excited to see you all today and hear you speak about your work. You are all very talented and contribute so much to the Arab American literary circle. Your work enriches our collection and gives us materials worthy of preservation for the generations to come. I would like to acknowledge our contributors, whom this program would not be possible without their generous contributions. The program is supported by Doctors Barbara and Adnan Aswad Endowment Fund. I'd also like to acknowledge that 2 of our awards are named in honor of George Ellenbogen and his late partner, the wonderful historian and writer Evelyn Shaker. He is an author, teacher, philanthropist, and longtime supporter of the Arab American National Museum and Book Award program. Now we will hear a few words from George.
Matt, let me begin by thanking you for the opportunity to add my congratulations for those being honored at the annual Arab American Book Awards. Before I do, however, I'd like to thank first Anana Mari and Devin Ackman, who were instrumental in establishing this awards program. And next to yourself and Maha Frege for maintaining a program that draws more and more attention to the voices of Arab Americans. During her lifetime, Evelyn Shaker, one of the sponsors of the Book Awards, had a long-standing interest and commitment to the well-being of her community. One of her legacies to her community is her own work. Bint Arab, her pioneering study of Arab and Arab American women, followed by her award-winning collection of short stories, Remember Me to Lebanon, and finally a memoir, Teaching Arabs, Writing Self, Memoirs of an Arab American Woman. Following her death in 2010, it seemed to me that her remaining legacy should be the means of enabling other writers to join the circle of Arab American literature. Thus, the funding of the Book Awards in our names. Both Evelyn and I fortunately wrote in a literary and political climate that was more congenial, encouraging, nurturing, whether the source was friends, family, funding agencies. As a result, we were given the time to write, whether by grant or sabbatical, residencies, and the means of gaining access to a community of readers within a larger community that was receptive to new voices. In these last years, we've been battered by messages that express mistrust of difference, often outright racism, and a craving for authoritarianism. And millions worldwide have been cowed by these messages, which so often are no more than simply prescriptions for the worst moments in human history. Their menace is a challenge to the arts, to artists of all stripes and to their audiences, those who view, listen, read. I know that it's gratifying to me, and I'm certain that it would have been gratifying to Evelyn to know that this program continues and will continue to send writers such as these recipients and the verbal lanterns they carry into the community. I very much regret the circumstances this year will prevent me from shaking hands with each award winner and purchasing autographed copies of their work. But I hope that you will take this brief message as an extension of my congratulations for their achievement and my best wishes for their future success.
Thank you, George, for those nice words and for your continued contributions to the Arab American Book Award program. This program would not be as successful as it is without your support. Without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic to our MC for the evening, Fargo Tbakhi. Fargo is a very talented Palestinian-American performance artist and writer. Some literary publications his work appear in is Mizna, Peach Mag, and Prolit. Fargo is currently our artist in resident here at the museum and is working with one of our book award winners, George Abraham, on a performance project. Take it away, Fargo.
Thank you so much, Saba. Marhaba and welcome everyone to the 15th Annual Arab American Book Awards, hosted by the one and only Arab American National Museum. My name is Fargo Tbakhi, and I am delighted to be your host and MC this evening. I'm honored to be here in residence at the museum and to be able to celebrate and honor the many worlds tonight's authors make and unmake in these exemplary works, all of them working to preserve or enact worlds which global colonialist hegemonies seek to suppress, freer worlds, more just worlds, worlds of tenderness and joy. It's my great luck to be here with all of you to breathe together inside those realities. As we go through each category tonight, I'll invite our wonderful winners to take the stage, so to speak, and share some of their work with us. We encourage everyone in the audience to purchase these books. They're very, very good, I promise, and support these authors after the event. Please use the link in the chat or on the Arab American National Museum website to buy the books from our winners' preferred bookstores. We'll be dropping that in the chat throughout the event, so you have no excuse. We're going to kick off our program tonight with the Evelyn Shaker Nonfiction Award, an honor that goes to scholarly and creative works that successfully weave the stories of our community with the realities we live in. Our first of two awarded titles is Arab Roots, Pathways to Syrian California by University of Southern California professor Sarah M.A. Gualtieri. In exploring the stories of Los Angeles Syrian Americans, judges have described Arab Roots as groundbreaking in its exploration of transnational Arab immigrant history and the multitude of identities spanning the Swana region, North America, and Central and South America. Please join me in congratulating and welcoming Sarah to the stage.
Thank you, Fargo, and thank you to the amazing staff at the Arab American National Museum. This award is incredibly moving to receive because the Arab American National Museum has been so central in the constitution of the field of Arab American studies as an archive, as a library, as a place of congregation. And indeed, I was remembering yesterday the 2011 sort of inaugural conference of the Arab American Studies Association. I also want to recognize my fellow awardees. I continue to be inspired by your beautiful work. I'm going to read a short section of my book from the conclusion, which underscores some of the problems in the metaphors we use to describe Arab migration to the Americas. And I'd like to close with a proposition on how we might generate new ones. Conceiving of the migration of Arab peoples from the Syrian lands in terms of waves is both apt and problematic. It is apt because it conveys magnitude and movement, a sense of traversal across wide expanses, and it is a metaphor that fits in with other terms in the migration lexicon that draw upon aquatic symbols, shores, ships, oceans, and tides most especially. It is problematic because it prioritizes the part of the journey that ends at the edges of the Americas, a telos toward arrival, where the wave washes up on the shore. The wave paradigm makes it difficult to capture the internal migrations that preceded cross-oceanic ones, and it cannot account for the intracontinental travels that had figured so prominently in this book. Mansour Nahra's move from Mexico to California, for example, or Leo Khoury's relocation from Buenos Aires to Santa Monica. Waves lose their conceptual power when people like Katrina Saade move within and across them. She was part of the first wave and the second wave, a migrant and a return migrant, someone whose multiple departures and arrivals placed her in interaction with various immigration regimes. And because the wave metaphor leads toward shores, where it supports botanical metaphors of roots and seeds, it has often been connected to Ellis Island imagery in the Arab American narrative. It has helped solidify as iconic the Syrian migrant disembarking there after a long fated journey across the Atlantic. This book has argued that to understand the presence of Syrians in Southern California in the first half of the 20th century is to come to terms with the connection to Mexico that so many among them had, a connection that manifested in repeated border crossings, the use of Spanish in their everyday interactions, and in the forging of family networks and solidarities that spanned the Americas. Indeed, it was to her family in Mexico to whom Katrina Saade turned when she tried to reunite with her son, George, who she had had to leave behind in Palestine when she returned to the United States in 1934. George was born in Mexico and was not a US citizen. He did not have papers to prove his Mexican nationality either. Katrina asked desperately for her cousins in Saltillo, Mexico, to find the midwife so she could testify to being present at his birth, but they could not locate her. George remained in Ramallah and eventually enlisted in the British Army during World War II. He was captured in Greece and taken prisoner of war by the German soldiers. He was finally allowed to enter the United States in 1945. It had taken 13 years for him to be reunited with his mother and siblings. George had, in fact, interfaced with the US border regime before, when he had crossed back over with Katrina from Mexico in 1923. While he was born in Hermosillo, his border crossing card listed his race and nationality as Syrian. When George declared his intention to become a US citizen in 1948, having sailed from Haifa, Palestine, his color was listed as white, his race as white, and his nationality as Mexican. He petitioned for and was granted US citizenship in 1953. His form did not have a designation for race, but his color was listed now as dark. Like his mother, his trajectory to Long Beach was multi-stranded. His designation as Syrian, Palestinian, Mexican, and American, imprecise, but not incommensurate. The stories of Syrians at the heart of this book demonstrate the ability of migrants to adapt, to learn new languages, and to use their skills to craft complex lives of work and leisure. They also document how those who have moved across borders to build and connect with community will fight for those ensnared by them. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your words, Sarah, and for the ways that your work pushes us to think more deeply about our own histories and the histories of each other. Next is the second winner of the Evelyn Shaker Nonfiction Award, Stories My Father Told Me, by artist Helen Zughaib and father Elia Zughaib. A beautiful collaboration of story and image by father and daughter. Stories My Father Told Me celebrates the richness of Syrian and Lebanese life and culture. Our judges called it an exhibit, one that showcases the depth and richness of Arab and Arab American heritage. Though Elia Zughaib is unable to be here synchronously with us tonight, we will be able to see some of his words via a video, and Helen is here to join us and accept the award. So please join me in welcoming Helen to the mic.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. I might be the thank you person, but thank you, my beautiful Arab American National Museum. Thank you to Catherine and Saba and Fatima and Fargo for your wonderful emceeing of this awards ceremony. I only wish I could see you all and meet you all and hug you all. And I'm so honored to be here today. I kind of sneak in as a visual artist, as Fargo just said. The book that we have here, these are my father's stories. My father from Syria, Damascus, and ultimately his immigration to America via Lebanon. And of course, there were no borders at that time. My dad was born under the French Mandate. And as an artist, after 9/11, as an Arab American artist, after 9/11, I felt the sort of violent reaction against Arabs, Arab Americans, Muslims, and so on. I know we all share that in common to some extent or another. A kind of counterbalance to that was beginning on this journey with my dad, though, to be brutally honest, he was very reluctant to write down his stories because in the tradition of storytelling in the Arab world, and I can say broadly, more broadly than that, the Hakawati, it's an oral tradition. So my father felt no reason to actually write down his stories. But at the urging of my mother, and this book would not have been possible without my mom, and they're listening tonight as my cousins and my brother and his wife is too. Thank you for that, Mom. We would not have this incredible history of times gone by, but times now too. That we, as Saba said, we're taking this into the generations that are coming after us. And that is the hope here. My father's dedication in this book are to his grandchildren. This is a form of education, the Hakawati. We all know what that means, the storyteller. And my father was our storyteller. I don't know, I was gonna read the last one. I'm not giving it away, but it's when my father finally comes to America. It begins in Syria as a young child, and then he goes to Lebanon, and finally he and Teta, my grandmother, and my two aunts, my one aunt, I'm sorry, Aunt Mary, received permission to come to America with my father. And I wasn't gonna read this, but I think I will in regards to you, Sarah, your wonderful presentation, because you touched upon some things that I think are important, and it kind of ties us together. And of course, the threads that tie us. The last story in Stories My Father Told Me is Coming to America. It's very brief, so we'll have time to see the video. It was the end of a long sea voyage. During dinner on the boat the night before we arrived, we learned that our ship, the Vulcania, would be passing by the Statue of Liberty at about 4 a.m. the next morning. A spontaneous decision was made by some of the younger passengers to see the Statue of Liberty. And so, 16 days after leaving the port of Beirut for New York City, an exuberant group of young people from Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine stayed up all night to greet the dawn on the Statue of Liberty. I remember it was a clear morning. It's difficult to read that without tears, but I would really love if Jason, you could show the video. The museum, since we aren't an actual present there, graciously sent us the most beautiful awards. And I kept my box closed until I could go to my dad and my mom, and we opened them together. So in this video, you will see my father and my mom, and hear my husband in the background as we accept our awards. And all I can say is that sometimes dreams really, really, really come true. And this is one for me, my dream come true. Okay, Habibi Jason, let's get the video on there so people can finish with me. This is our, you can hear me, right? This is our award from the Arab American National Museum. Did they do two? Oh my goodness, they did two?
Well done.
Let's see what this is. Oh, how nice. Don't let the box drop that. Okay. Oh, wow, look at that, Daddy. Yeah. This is our award. They did two. Stories My Father Told Me, Helen Zughaib. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, now wait, Dad. And this is the best one. That's so pretty. It's beautiful. Oh my goodness, it's so beautiful. That's your award.
Yes.
Evelyn Zughaib. See? Evelyn Zughaib. That's your award for your stories, Dad.
Yes. Yes.
Isn't that cool, Dad?
That is cool, Dad.
Mama? Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you, Arab American National Museum.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Beautiful. It's so beautiful.
With us and reminding us of how beautiful and how powerful it can be when we honor and preserve the stories of our families. On behalf of the Arab American National Museum, we'd also like to extend an honorable mention to Articulations of Resistance, Transformative Practices in Contemporary Arab American Poetry by Associate Professor of American and Comparative Literature at the American University of Beirut, Sirène Harb. Sirène's important work provides a much-needed study on the intimate links and multi-layered connections between Arab American poetry and resistance. And so, Sirène, the floor is yours. You're on mute.
Thank you very much. I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate the winners and the honorable mentions, and to really thank the Arab American Museum for this wonderful celebration and occasion to get to know the works that have been published, and the honorable, the various types of genres also. I'd like to actually read a brief selection from the introduction to Articulations of Resistance. Located at the intersection of ethnic, post-colonial, and transnational studies, this book probes discursive formations and their intervention in the portrayal of history, space, language, and solidarity in contemporary Arab American poetry. In its focus on poems penned by Arab American writers such as Philip Mitris, Marwa Hilal, Lisa Suhair Majaj, Khalid Matawa, Sinan Antoun, Hayyan Shrara, and David Williams, among others, the book examines how articulations of resistance to hegemonic formations shape the representation of time, trauma, and solidarity. This resistance is also conveyed, the book argues, through the strategic use of bilingualism and hybrid poetic forms. The book studies such articulations of resistance in relation to four interconnected axes, namely the translation and framing of the tragedy of 9/11, which challenges Manichaean projections of Arabness and Americanness, the depiction of shadows and ghosts to evoke the uncanny and blur traditional configurations of time and space, the construction of bilingual texts that adopt a foreignizing approach against the ideological hegemony of monolingualism and monoculturalism, and the projection of affiliative links with ethnic liberation figures to create alternative structures of belonging and affirm embodied agency in the context of anti-colonial and anti-imperialist struggle. Such approaches project a broader understanding of the function of poetry in its intersection with social, political, and historical concerns, and complicate questions of literary tradition and genealogies apart from normative paradigms. But what is the importance of such stress on elements of language, space, affiliative links, and haunting in relation to resistance? What links these specific variables in the study of Arab American poetic production? To answer these questions, it is important to remember that language and control over space, as well as geography, have historically served as tools to impose hegemony and map the world according to hierarchies, informing belonging and non-belonging, inclusion and exclusion. Very often, the ways in which languages and spaces become dominant in this hierarchy go through the repression of forms of difference pertaining to other groups as well as their culture and traditions. This repression is mediated by the use of violence as a tool for implementing supremacy and establishing the victor's version of history as the only legitimate one. Such violence does not end when a specific event is officially over and done with. As studies probing the philosophical, psychological, and sociological dimensions of violence show, repressed violence comes back, often in the form of shadows and ghosts, to haunt the present, making the victims' voices heard and disturbing traditional configurations of time and space. Shadows and ghosts are thus signifiers of violence and violations mediated by control over language, space, and history. The representation of shadows and ghosts becomes a site of exploration of how power structures operate. It also uncovers hierarchies and distinctions underlying forms of eligibility and definition of value. These forms of eligibility do not only inform monolingualism, monoculturalism, and new imperialist figurations of time and space, but they also are equally embedded in other normative formations such as minority and bourgeois nationalism. Confrontation with such hegemonic formations results in the articulation of a vision of identity and solidarity characterized by multiplicity and relationality. This vision challenges binaries such as self-other, inside-outside, us-them, and English-Arabic to produce questions that uncover complex webs of interactions and workings of memory and community. The articulation of these questions mediates transformative practices manifested in the creation of bilingual spaces and cross-cultural poetic and linguistic structures projecting silenced aspects of the Arab American experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sirène. One of the things that I think is so wonderful about an evening like this is being able to see the ways that all of our work illuminates each other's work, something that Helen already pointed out in drawing a connection between her and her father's stories and Sarah's work, the way that Sirène's work, thinking about Arab American poetics, helps illuminate the work of our Poetry Award winners this evening. It's a moment of just seeing so many ties of generosity between us, and it's really wonderful. Shifting genres now, I'd like to welcome the winner of the Fiction Award. Surprising and profound, this powerful novel is searing, it's darkly funny, and a unique portrait of a Palestinian woman. Our judges describe it as a complex and memorable page-turner with rigorously honest prose, something that I can confirm as it's one of my favorite books. This year, the Fiction Award goes to Against the Loveless World by Palestinian-American writer and political activist Susan Abulhawa. Please join me in congratulating and welcoming Suzanne.
Thank you, Fargo, and thank you to the Arab American Museum and to all the judges, and congratulations to all the winners. I'm very grateful for this award, and it means a lot to receive this from our own community, so thank you. I'm going to read briefly from a passage in the book that describes the protagonist, Nahar's arrival in Palestine when she goes to look for her mother's old home. Her mother had been there just a few months previous, and now she is trying to find this home in Haifa. Finally, we arrived in Haifa. People call it a mixed city, but that isn't true. It was clear where Jews lived compared with Palestinians. There was no mixing. We drove around a bit looking for the address, entering an area of modern houses on a hill overlooking the ocean. I thought perhaps Beckett had made a mistake until a cluster of beautiful stone homes came into view, and he pulled to the side of the road. The homes were different, but the same. Their ancient arches, masonry, walled gardens, and grand entrances contrasted with the flat, angular new construction with steel beams, glass walls, and sleek European opulence. I think it's this one, Beckett said, pointing to a 3-story home with multiple balconies overlooking the street. Next to it was what looked to be a small tree farm surrounded by a low stone wall with an old wooden gate slightly ajar, barely hanging on its hinges. In Mama's old photos, the trees weren't as mature, and the house was more visible from the street. I knew the main entrance was on the side, but one could access the garden from the wooden gate, which used to have an ornate ceramic plaque that read, "Home of El-Hajj Abu Ibrahim Nasir Jamal Nasrallah." I walked up to the wooden gate. The indentation where the plaque had been was still visible if you knew what to look for. I thought about walking around to the entrance and knocking on the door, but the decrepit gate beckoned me. I stepped into the lush space of our absence. These were the trees my great-grandfather had planted for his children and grandchildren. My grandfather would have planted some for me and Jihad had our destiny not been stolen. I began walking among those trees, looking for the carvings my mother had told me about, but I saw none. At the far edge of the garden was a sycamore fig tree. It bore red fruit close to the bark, unlike the green and brown figs I'd imagined. I looked around before hiking myself up on its trunk to pick one. It was fragrant and much sweeter than regular figs. I climbed as best I could, grabbing fistfuls of fruit and tucking them into my purse as I searched for evidence that this was my mother's tree. A commotion in the street distracted me, and I grabbed one last bundle of figs. On the branch where the fruit had been were jagged lines. I pulled away some vines and more fruit to reveal the rest. The noise from the street was growing louder as I made out the words, Rashida, Habibat Baba. Rashida, Daddy's girl. That's how my grandfather had referred to my mother. This was her fig tree. This tree was a member of my family. I belonged to it. All the trees in the garden were my family. The noise from the street was now upon me, a middle-aged woman screaming at me in Hebrew. I began climbing down, fruit still in my hand. Bucket was trying to reason with her in Hebrew, at the same time imploring me to hurry up. She called the police, hurry, he warned me in Arabic. Just as I touched the ground, the woman slapped the fruit from my hand and yanked me by my hair. Unthinkingly, I punched her, then again and again. She was what we used to call in my school days a princess, someone who had no idea how to fight. I wanted to beat her bloody for taking away our trees, for pulling the land from under us. But Bucket caught my arm and dragged me away, and we ran together to his car. Neighbors were just beginning to gather and might have overtaken us had we left a moment later. Adrenaline pumped through us as we drove away slowly, as if we were an ordinary Jewish couple going about our day, just in case we crossed paths with the police. When we were far enough away, convinced we had escaped detection, I pulled some figs from my purse and we laughed in a way that was somewhat deranged and euphoric. You beat the shit out of that woman. Good thing this car has hot plates so they can't trace it back to me, Becker said. I turned to him with shock, admiration, and renewed adrenaline of realizing how much deeper the trouble we escaped could have been. What? Bilal didn't tell you? We steal these motherfuckers' cars all the time and mix up their plates, Becker said, laughing, proud of doing his part to make the lives of the colonizers a little less convenient. We continued to revel in the thrill of return, escape, and figs. I thought about that woman, the commotion that preceded our confrontation. What was she saying anyway? I asked Beckett. She started out nice, thinking I was Jewish, but wanting to know what I was doing there parked on the side of the road. I told her I was just admiring the houses because I was thinking of moving into the area. I did my best to sound Jewish, but they can tell from the way we talk or the way we stand or whatever. So she started getting louder, telling me to leave before she called the police. She accused me of plotting to rob her house. She asked if the Arab woman sent me. I didn't know what she meant, but apparently an Arab woman came by a couple of months ago, claiming that had been her childhood home. Then what else did she say about the Arab woman? I interrupted him. That she was a terrorist. Apparently, the Arab woman saw the gate open and helped herself into the garden. The Jewish woman found her there crying and, well, you can imagine the scene. I'm sure the Arab woman left in tears. Beckett thought for a moment. I'm such an idiot. She was talking about your mother. Was your mother there 2 months ago? It was, surely, Mama. Now I knew why she had refused to speak of it when I asked her in Amman. It was too painful. I wished I had beaten that woman more. I wished I could have walked around the side to see the main entrance, to peek over the mountains and see the ocean as my mother would have done every day of her childhood. I wondered if Mama had done that when she came to see her home, or if she too hadn't made it beyond the garden. I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Among other things, I feel very grateful for the reminder that we belong to the land and not the other way around. Next, I would love to give the floor to Dima Alzayat, author and recipient of the Fiction Honorable Mention for her debut collection, Alligator and Other Stories. The award-winning stories in Dima's bold collection are rich and relatable, threaded together with a sense of displacement in everyday scenarios. The stories capture a broad range of Arab American voices and are moving and distinctive in the way that only short stories can be. Dima, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Fargo. I'm so honored to be recognized alongside so many writers I admire and academics like Dr. Sarah Gualtieri, whose really important research into Arab American identity and history has inspired and informed my fiction. So I'm really happy to be here today. And I'm just going to read a short excerpt at the beginning of one of the stories in my collection called Ghusl, and it's about a woman who's preparing her younger brother's body for burial. Under the bright lights, the skin had turned a whitish gray. A bandage wrapped around the face kept the mouth closed and flattened the black hair, made the chin thick and shapeless, and pushed the cheeks toward shut lids. Rolled towels beneath the head and neck lifted the shoulders slightly from the metal bed, and under the white sheet, the big toes were strung together with twine. I will do it myself, she had said. Haram, haram, the men had replied, and she had laughed inches from their faces. And what is this? Is this not also sin? They had waited with her for the coroner's van, had unlocked the room and shown her where the materials were kept. After they lifted and placed him on the table, the eldest among them turned to her once more. Sister, let us prepare him. The rest shifted their eyes as she moved closer to the table, uncovered his face, and asked them to leave. Towels and sheets, white and folded, were stacked on the counter next to a plastic bucket and washcloth. She washed her hands in the sink and let the hot water run until her fingers became red and raw, the rough powdered soap granules burrowing beneath her nails. When she put the gloves on, they were tight and pinched her damp skin, and she pulled them off and set them on the counter. The hygiene mask stayed in its box, and the incense stick stood unlit in its holder. With a washcloth wrapped around her hand, she lifted the half-filled bucket and turned toward the table where he lay. The skin to her looked coated in silver dust, like the ashes that remain after the burning of a great tree. Up we go. With her right hand at the nape of his neck, she lifted his head and shoulders, and with the left slowly and gently pressed down on his stomach, keeping cloth between fingers and skin. Several times she pressed and released, and without completely lifting the sheet, wiped and cleaned between the legs in short, quick moves. Again at the counter, she washed her hands and cleaned the bucket. Even with her back to him, she could still see his face, the thin closed lids and the brown eyes she knew had to still be beneath them. If she stood without moving, she could see him sit up on the steel table and swing his legs over its edge. He would look around and catch his image in the mirror on the wall. How funny I look, ya Zainab. She gripped the counter to steady herself as warm water filled the bucket. Where are you? When she turned around, he was still on his back, the brown eyes shut and the lips a pale violet. Look at us playing hide and seek even now. She carried the bucket and a clean washcloth to the table and set them down, took her time wetting the cloth, dipping it into the bucket and squeezing it several times until there was nothing left to do but begin. She moved the sheet and looked at the hands once so small. Give me your hand, ya Hamoud. Cleaning now between the fingers of hands bigger than hers, moving from the smallest to the thumb. She wet the washcloth again and touched it to the forehead and slowly worked it over the eyes, the moisture clinging to thick lashes, and down the nose, her hand hesitating above the faded scar that began at the bridge and zigzagged down to the right and disappeared. He was 3 when he had fallen, and she was 9, and she had been chasing him up and down the hallway when he slipped on the black and white tiles and his giggles turned to wails. She had picked him up and held him as blood gushed from the wound between his eyes. He had clung onto her so tightly, had pulled on the skin of her neck as he cried, would not release her even when their father came running into the room. Her eyes moved to the top of the head, the gauze that covered, concealed. We'll clean it, the hospital nurse had said. She had wanted to say no, dizzied by the thought of more hands she did not know, touching and prodding and taking. Now her eyes fixed on the cloth until she willed them to shift. To follow instead the washcloth, she ran over each arm, right and then left, flattening the small hairs against the skin. Within seconds, they began to dry, and she watched them shrink back into curls. She looked at the hair on her own arms, not much lighter or finer, and a smile flashed across her face and disappeared. Neither one wanting to wait for the other, they used to stand side by side at the sink to make wudu before prayer, take turns running arms beneath the faucet, carrying with cupped hands water to wet their hair and clean their mouths and noses, their neck and ears. And I think I will stop there. Thank you, Fargo.
Thank you so much, Dima, for allowing us to share in that ritual of grief. Our next category for tonight is children and young adult literature. This year, our first award goes to The Arabic Quilt, written by journalist Khalil and illustrated by Anait Semirdzhyan. Our judges appreciated the heartwarming story, describing it as a book that values difference, bilingualism, and multiculturalism, and can make us all smarter and kinder, which I think is very, very valuable. So please join me in congratulating and welcoming Aya and Anait to the mic.
Hi, everybody. Congratulations to all the other winners and honorees, and it's so exciting to be here. I'm going to actually go ahead and read a couple of pages from the book, which Anai is here, and we're meeting for the first time. It's really exciting. I'm going to read it first and show you some illustrations. That night, as Mama puts leftover shorbat adz in Kenzie's lunchbox, Kenzie gently pats Mama's back. Can you please pack me a turkey sandwich instead? Before bed, Kenzie writes a poem as she hugs her quilt, which smells like Teta's home. The next day, Molly says, Mrs. Hoggins said, I hurt your feelings. I'm sorry I laughed at your mom's language. It sounded funny. It may sound funny to you, but that's only because you don't speak Arabic, Kenzie says. She feels a lump forming in her throat. My parents say that learning different languages makes this person smarter and kinder, she blurts out. Okay, whatever, Molly says, skipping away. Mrs. Hoggin calls Kenzie to her desk after lunch. I found this notebook on the floor, and it was open to a lovely poem, she says. I was describing my teta's quilt, Kenzie says. When I visited her in Egypt, she gave it to me. My teta only speaks Arabic. Mrs. Hoggin smiles. That is special. I would love to see your quilt. Can I bring it to school? Kenzie asked. Sure, bring it tomorrow. The next day, Kenzie unfolds her quilt in front of the class. Her heart is pounding. This is my quilt that my teta in Egypt made, she says. That's cool. I want to make a quilt like that, Deshawn says. Maybe we can all make one for our classroom, Claire shouts. Mrs. Hoggin nods and smiles. On Friday, Mrs. Hoggin makes an announcement. I have an exciting project for us all to work on. Kenzie's mom is here to help us make a quilt of all your names in Arabic. As Mama steps forward, Kenzie thinks how beautiful she looks. Shukran for welcoming me here, Mama says. Kenzie and I will write down your names in Arabic and you will copy your name on your own quilt piece. Molly is not enthusiastic about the project. Who cares about Arabic? We live in America. My mom says we should only speak English. In response, Mrs. Hoggin starts writing words on the board. Algebra, coffee, lemon, sugar. Does anyone know what these words have in common? She asks. They come from Arabic words, Kenzie whispers. Mrs. Hoggin nods. Learning other languages besides the one we grow up with helps make the world a friendlier place. We can speak non-English languages and still be American. I wonder what my name looks like in Arabic, Brianna says. Kenzie and Mama write down everyone's names. Neat, shukran, Amina exclaims. Everyone copies their Arabic names onto sheets of colored paper. Then they decorate their papers with glitter and jewels and place them on the table for the glue to dry. On Monday morning, you will see a beautiful class quilt hanging in the hall, Mrs. Hoggin tells them. Kenzie is nervous when the bell rings on Monday morning and the kids file into school. What if the quilt didn't turn out nicely? And here is the final quilt. and I don't want to give the ending away. So I just want to talk a little bit about this. So 25 years ago, I was a third grade student in a small, mostly white town called Lima, Ohio. I don't remember too much from living in Minot, except that it was very cold and very snowy. But I do remember a teacher in third grade who actually did the same exact lesson. She asked me one day to write me and my classmates' names in Arabic. So I remember this very vividly. We had a bunk bed at our house. I know my mom and my dad are watching this. So I know that I remember our bunk bed, and I just sat there and I was writing everybody's names in Arabic, and my mom was helping me sound out the letters in Arabic, and we wrote them all down. And I remember the next day I handed their names to everybody, and they were so excited to see their names in Arabic. And the teacher just made me feel so proud, and she didn't make me feel like ashamed or weird. And she knew that I was Egyptian because me and my brother were the only Muslims in the whole school. We used to give her treats during the holidays, Egyptian treats. So we did that, and I just remember that she made us feel welcome. So the book is actually based on that. It's based on true stories. And of course, there are other things that a lot of us can relate to, like the accents mentioned in here, the food. She really wants to fit in. And so she asks Mama to make her a turkey sandwich instead of delicious shorbatats, which is lentil soup. So I just remember that moment, and we actually connected. I was able to connect to the teacher when the book was published, and I sent her a copy of the book, and she went to my old elementary school. So that was really fun to connect with her afterwards. So I know that, I know my kids right now also, they're in elementary school, and it's just so important to have books for them to see themselves in. So I'm super, super grateful. Also, the Arabic Quilt was one of the books that was on the banned book list that York district banned a couple of months ago. And it was so disappointing when I found it on the list. Me and some other author friends, we were talking about it, and it was reversed afterwards. But a friend recently, I was telling a friend about this, and she told me a quote that really stuck with me. And she said that a queen will turn pain into power. And it's so true, because this is what we're all doing here through our hardship and struggle and pain. We're turning it into power, and we're writing about it. And our voices are so loud and clear. And I'm just so thankful for the museum for giving us the opportunity here, and for the publisher and my agent for being so supportive, and of course my family and friends and the community members and everybody who purchased this book. So yeah, our stories are here to stay, and they're louder than loud. Our words are really our power. And I'm going to hand the mic over to the amazing illustrator, Anait.
Thank you, Aya. Hi, everyone. It's a big privilege to be here today in this great company of book creators. The Arabic Quilt is dear to me because when I first read the manuscript, I was touched. This story hit close to home. My family and we immigrated from Armenia 9 years ago. And my twins, they were 8 years old when they started adapting to new culture and new school. And interesting fact that my kids asked me to pack them a turkey sandwich or peanut butter jelly sandwich instead of our traditional meals, so they don't look different. And although I'm super grateful to welcoming teachers and friendly kids in our school, but I wish this kind of books were available so my kids can learn to embrace their culture much sooner. And I'm happy that other kids now can learn from Kanzi's experience. And I'm so proud to be a part of creating this book. And I want to say thank you to Aya for this beautiful story, to our publisher, to my agent, Christy, for making it happen, and to my family and friends for their support. And a huge thank you to the Arab American Museum for honoring our book with this award. Thank you. Congratulations to all the winners. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. It's so wonderful to be able to share and hear stories of collaboration across difference and celebration of connection, both in the process of making this book and also in the book itself. Next up, the second winner in our children and young adult category goes to Farah Rock's Fifth Grade by author Susan Muaddi Darraj. Depicting a brave and intelligent Palestinian-American girl, Farah Rock's Fifth Grade is a relatable story about growing up, bullying, and family with a lasting lesson. Let's welcome Susan to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this honor. It's really an honor to be with all the other awardees tonight. Thank you to the museum and to the judges for this award. This award is a really important one because our community is often written about. We very rarely get a chance to write our own stories, and it's very hard, especially I think for the children in our community, to read so many books about, you know, other cultures and not see their own lives reflected in books. It's less than like a fraction of a percent of books that are published every year with Arab characters by Arab authors. So it's really difficult. Walter Dean Myers once said, books transmit values. They explore our common humanity. What is the message when some children are not represented in those books? And our children are not represented in very many books. So that's why I'm grateful to the museum for lifting up books like mine and like Aya's beautiful book, The Arabic Quilt. I was inspired to write my book by a lot of different, factors, primarily my own children. My daughter asked me once when she was about 10, and she was an avid reader, she still is, why there aren't very many books with Arab girls in them. She was reading Anne of Green Gables at the time. And it struck me, I've talked about this many times, but it struck me that, I grew up in the United States as well. And it struck me that in all the years that existed between my own childhood and my daughter's childhood, that problem was still not rectified of representation. So I started to write a book for her about a happy Palestinian girl who's brave and funny and loves her family. And I named that character Farah because Farah means joy in Arabic. And I wanted Arab kids to see another Arab child in a book who is joyful, who's happy with her culture, who moves seamlessly between home where they speak Arabic and school where they speak English. And she moves seamlessly between these worlds in a joyful, happy way. And that the problems in her life, the conflicts of the story come not from her culture, they come from other elements, because I think that's an authentic story. So I'm grateful to the museum again for lifting up that story. Thank you to my 3 children who inspire me to write every day. Thank you to the children that I meet, Arab and non-Arab children, when I visit schools and libraries across the country, either in person or virtually. It really astonishes me every time I read Farah Rocks or present Farah Rocks to a school. I was just speaking to a 4th grade class, and the Arab and non-Arab children are like, they're so welcoming of cultures other than their own. I really wish the rest of America could think the way that children think and be joyful and happy when they're introduced to new cultures. So I'm grateful to those children who inspire me to continue writing books for children. Thank you to my publisher and my editors, Capstone Books, and to Eliza Leahy and Julie Glassman. It was not an easy feat when I decided to write a chapter book series, because Farah Rocks is a series. There's actually 4 of them out now. It was hard to sell the idea of a book series about a Palestinian American child to publishers, but Capstone really welcomed the idea. And I learned a lot about writing for children from my editors, from Eliza Leahy and Julie Glassman. Thank you to my editor, Tom Colchi, for championing the idea that I had. And thank you especially to my illustrator, Ruaida Ma'anna, who is also Arab American. It's interesting and fascinating when a character who's been in your head for a couple of years, you suddenly see that character illustrated on the page. So thank you to Ruaida for making Farah look authentic and look the way that she looked in my head. So I really appreciate that, and the art and your talent and your artistry. Congratulations once again to my fellow winners. It is no small feat in the American publishing industry to publish an authentic Arab voice. So congratulations to you, and I'm so excited to read your work. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Susan. And thank you especially for that reminder that it is truly wonderful that all of the authors tonight have been able to get their work out. And as a reminder to everyone watching, you can purchase all of these books. There are links on the Arab American National Museum website and in the chat where you can find them at these authors' preferred bookstores. So definitely do that. Okay, we're going to shift genres again to poetry this time. This year, the first George Ellenbogen Poetry Award goes to Birthright by poet, writer, and engineer George Abraham. George's highly anticipated debut, Birthright, is for, about, and by Palestine. The judges have beautifully described this work as having the restless feet of someone born in exile, someone for whom the weight of the heavy cross has transcended into feather, as Abraham's subject floats and fights across forms in attempt to conquer the conquest itself. So please join me in welcoming my dear, dear friend and inspiration, George, to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. My name is George Abraham, and I'm tuning in to y'all from the unceded lands of the Council of Three Fires. Thank you, Fargo, for that generous intro, and to the judges for those words. Thank you to the Arab American Museum. This is such a great honor. The Arab American Book Award is one of my favorite lineages of poets, honestly, from Suhair Hamad, who was the first winner and one of the first people to make me fall in love with poetry, to Phil Metris and Hayan Sharada, who I wouldn't be writing without, and to my sisters Zainal Sus and Marwa Hilal, who won last year. Grateful doesn't even begin to describe. I remember when Birthright was but a fantasy in a conversation with my friends Marwa and Jess over Argila in New York. After an altercation with a Zionist wearing a Birthright shirt earlier that day, I wanted to steal that word, to make it my own. I consider the title Birthright to be the first poem in the book, the gates of hell framing the journey to come, the entry point to language wherein a reader's gazes and assumptions were checked at such a gate. For some, the second poem is that moment when at a bookstore wherein one picks up the book and realizes it's a Palestinian return narrative, that the word birthright has become a mirror into which Zionists look and realize something in this world finally isn't made for them. And after that unseeing, from that void which renders the Zionist reader not merely mute, but languageless, the journey of Birthright is a one of learning to see the whole of my people in all our complexity and humanity, despite America, despite the distances implicit to diaspora. But it is through distance that Birthright becomes a queer narrative. The distance between my speaker and their upbringing in a Palestinian family of the American South, enacted into a distance between the book as a physical object and my family. For some of us, the coming out narrative is itself a kind of border. Would you believe me if I said I'm not out to my family for their sake more than my own? That I find liberation in the fact that my queerness is mine and mine alone, in the chosen family I've formed therein. Since its publication, 2 men in my family have passed away without reading Birthright. My grandfather, who passed in quarantine after a long fight with cancer, and my father, who passed away suddenly last month of its sporadic, incurable neurodegenerative disease. In reading this book through the retrospective lens of their passings, I can't help but notice how my father and grandfather are everywhere in these poems, even though I wrote it knowing I'd never let either of them read it. My father especially haunts these poems like a specter, and the image of him waking me up an hour earlier than necessary for school every morning through my childhood, and the image of him taking care of a dying elderly neighbor, and after her passing, planting an unknowing invasive species of fern from her backyard into our own, and watching them grow into an ocean of hands over the years. And the image of him being held at gunpoint by his abusive alcoholic uncle after standing up for his mother, suddenly widowed in a country that could never love her. At the center of every image is my father's difficult, stubborn love, the selves he lost in fatherhood, how he insistently loved his family, even if such a love cost him his life. And is that not the queerest form of love? To love despite the most impossible times? To love despite the most impossible countries? Thank you, Baba, for teaching me to love. I wouldn't be possible without you. Thank you, Sido, for teaching me what it means to return. When I told you I was returning to Palestine, you told me that you hadn't seen Haifa, Jaffa, or the sea in decades. You told me that my body's return to the land was itself the only way your return could happen. I hope this book does justice to you and our ancestors who've welcomed you into heaven. Thank you, Teta. It was you who first taught me my first language, and may my every word resurrect your memory despite my English. Thank you to my family from heaven to earth, by blood and by choice. There are too many of you to name, but I love you all. Thank you to my editor, Hanif Abdurraqib, for being the first person to see this book. Thank you, Button Poetry, for taking a chance on a book like Birthright. Thank you to my every teacher and mentor from high school, especially Mr. Knight, to my undergrad mentors, Vision, Ruba, and Said, to my peers without whom I wouldn't be possible, Marwa, Julian, Noor Ibn Najim, Noor Hindi, Bradley, Fargo, Tasha, Summer, Jess, Tariq, Hazim, and so many more, from Philly to Boston to Chicago. Thank you, Rawi. Thank you, Kundiman. Thank you, Watering Hole. Thank you, Cantab. Thank you, House Slam. Thank you to my former lab mates, Rashid Tanvi, Ryan, Hayun, and Laith, without whom I wouldn't have been able to survive the abusive institution that is Harvard. Thank you to my Leadowitz cohort here at Northwestern and the family we're becoming. And last but not least, thank you to my little brother, Jared. You're the only one I can trust with my poems. I'll now read a very short poem from Birthright. Allow me to choose softness. Allow me to return on my terms. Ars Poetica with parallel dimensions. I must confess, this softness is often an endless well I fall into, the way a snake chases itself into itself. On tamer days, I blame the fruit for the thick ripening and not the small jealousies endangering the honeybee. Some days, I cannot distinguish desire from extinction. Every love of mine demands bloodshed of a hunter's lineage. Oh, exile, my exile, that could unwrite our laced talons into metal wings, that we could uncauterize the crimson sky and fly into a sunset spilling blood that is not our own. That I could turn two mirrors in on themselves, unraveling those infinite dimensions, infinite copies of self. Somewhere I pluck an apple and a parallel self suffers the expulsion. And what is that if not ancestry, rippling across space, itself timeless? In this reality, I lose a country for another Eden to blossom beneath a more forgiving stratosphere. I confess I am more vengeful than my oppressors deem me, my disposition a learned burial. I thang so hard it louds my smile, writes my cyanide ducts into gentle rain and truth. I wish my every oppressor an eternity of carnage for every country stolen from us, from all of my loved ones, the way infinity plus infinity is just infinity, forever fails us like that. Our infinity is the moment between child's fist and soldier's gun. Therefore, our infinity is everything but child's fist and soldier's gun. I know threat is not object, but state of being. I love him, so he's everyone's threat. yet. I bloody my hands for him, so he must be God of somewhere. I know heaven is a poem I can survive the end of. I know holy is waking up with a knotted neck on a crowded red sofa in Philadelphia with all of my loved ones. I know that too is itself a country even I can have faith in. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, George. And I will just say that Birthright is nothing if not an infinity of the most complete love. So thank you for that. Next is the second winner of the George Ellen Bogan Poetry Award, Wash's Praise by writer Noor Naga. Wash's praise imbues a sense of wonder into everyday life, leaving the judges asking themselves, how does Noor do it? Described as true, wild, and gorgeous, the work transforms the daily into the sacred. Noor, the floor is yours.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much, Fargo, and thank you to all of you. I feel sort of a little bit stressed coming at the end of such an incredible roster of writers and readers and community organizers of various kinds. So big thank you to everybody who's present today and everybody who's behind the scenes, everybody at the Arab American Book Award and the National Museum, and yeah, everybody who's sort of making it possible for us to do what we're doing, those that came before and those who are writing in the shadows now and those who are still coming. I'm going to read just a tiny excerpt from this book. It's from the middle section. There's nothing that you need to know. It's sort of a meditation on God, and it's a sort of quiet way to maybe wrap up the readings. So this is from the section titled North, and they are all untitled, very tiny poems. So Basmala. Of Mansur ibn Ammar, they say the reason for his repentance is that he found one day a piece of paper with the Basmala written on it. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most compassionate. He picked it up, and unable to find a suitable place to put it, he ate it. If Mansur found the paper because God willed Mansur to find the paper which had his name on it. If Mansur did not find a place to put it, Mansur did not find a place to put it because God willed Mansur not to find a suitable place to put it. If Mansur ate the paper because God willed Mansur to eat the paper which had his name on it. The question, what is a suitable place to put God, is not the question. The question is, how did God get out in the first place? Answer, he left with the wow. If all the wheres have skies, my God, and all the skies have hows, and all the hows beg a who, my God, it is not even raining. Most days a blue's too blue, how to live beneath what I do and do nothing, but walk with a face of weather, the very upness of the air absurd. Based on what you whispered, that you whisper in my jugular vein, I can only conclude, you are the iron in me. You are the iron in me. With the eye, as with all fair questions, what goes out must come back in. Are there undressed trees in each of my lungs, or is it the sky that's breathing? I have seen the body in diagrams and would not have believed them, had I not also seen from a plane 6 years ago the rivers at my sickly wrists. Had I not seen the hairy toes of trees that are the teeth of trees, had I not noticed the lightning veins of leaves when a storm cuts power in the city. The wind whips its hair, takes down the moon, the glass of shops think fractured thoughts, the streets jingle with thieves. Wherever I go, strangers around me stop. They start to look up too. It is what Cuckoo calls a quorum-like response. Cuckoo studies brains. She says brains are peach seeds. Brains have trees inside them too. He speaks to me in pattern. After eating cherries on the roof, Cuckoo comes into the kitchen with a seed on her sternum, sweeter than a sucked mole. Should I leave my boots by the door, Noor? I tell her every single time, and Debke with her boots all over the floor. I place them side by side on my pillow like a dream of twin ravens. Cuckoo laughs, and her laugh is, the only thing holier than a question mark is an exclamation point. And the loneliest thing, the sad, saggiest thing, Cuckoo tells me to tell her when the time for prayer has come, is neither. He speaks to me in pattern. My answer is the gasp. When is the time for prayer? When the clouds are frightened beyond wetness. I wash my face in sunrise, that citrus scent of birdsong. I chew handfuls of snow. When the disciples of Jesus passed the carcass of a dog, they said in unison, "It stinks repulsively." And Jesus answered, "But how white the teeth." When I leave a line of fruit seeds on the windowsill for the cardinals, I draw my joy in pencil when I draw my joy in time. In the closeness of your twilight summer, beneath thousands of winged insects mating in the air, I sing for the gift of you. When on the windowsill where the seeds were, an earring winks at me. A room without a body in it is not a room with a body in it, even if the body is sleeping. Neither is empty. To realize that the table and chair legs, that the nails in the chair legs, that the grain in the wood of the chair legs, and even the air between the chair legs is wakeful, is to never be alone. To say nothing of the tendril growing from the cupboard garlic, to say nothing of knitting spiders, to say nothing of rain. Joy is also praise. Among the joyous population of furniture, I praise. Thanks very much, guys. That's where I'm going to leave off.
Thank you, Noor. What a truly, truly wonderful way for us to come to the end of our ceremony tonight. I don't think that, I feel like every event should end with such a lovely meditation on the divine. So this does bring our ceremony to a close. And thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Special thanks to our readers for sharing their incredible work with us, and endless gratitude to the Arab American National Museum for creating space for our community's voices to be heard and shared among friends. The pandemic has profoundly impacted many arts and cultural institutions, but we're grateful for the continued support of our Book Awards audience, as well as all the other audiences that make the museum's work possible. It was my honor and pleasure to be your guide tonight. I encourage you again to purchase and support the work of each of our featured authors. You can follow the link in the chat for our bookstore recommendations. I also encourage you to continue following the Arab American National Museum. Check out arabamericanmuseum.org for a list of upcoming events and programs. Once again, thank you all. From here, I will pass it to Matthew Jaber Stifler, the Research and Content Manager at the Arab American National Museum.
Thank you, Fargo, and thank you everybody for being here. I really also want to thank the judges and Saba, our librarian, for running these awards, and of course all the staff behind the scenes that made this virtual event just flawless. Before we close, I just have two announcements to make. First, if you haven't seen it already, the Arab American National Museum has partnered with the Center for Arab American Studies at University of Michigan Dearborn to produce a brand new podcast called Seen Jeem, highlighting the work of contemporary Arab America and Swana diaspora writers, many of whom are also former and likely future Book Award winners. You can download the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and Anchor. Season 1 has 15 poets, novelists, and essayists, and you can find out more at seenjeempodcast.org. And it just launched this week, so really we're looking forward to see people's reactions reading it. Keep up with us at the museum in our Istaqbal al-Mustaqbal season by visiting our website to find recordings of past events and sign up for upcoming hybrid events like a host of people's Kilo Batra theatrical performance that happens December 9th through the 12th, and a workshop and performance with our host and artist in residence Fargo and Arab American Book Award winner George Abraham coming up in December. So visit arabamericanmuseum.org to learn more. Again, thank you all for coming. And if I could have all of the winners turn on their cameras so we can see everybody at once, that would be wonderful. Thank you again, everybody. I hope you all have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, you guys.
Bye.
Elf Mabruk.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Arab American National Museum. Love you
Thanks,
guys.
everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.